Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Glasgow East and his comments on nappies, an issue I know plenty about, as well as numerous other speeches from excellent contributors today. Now, I welcome this bill and the significant focus that the government is placing on our environment. Recent flooding, including in St Asaph in my constituency, highlights the fact that the provisions of the Climate Change Act are more important than ever. This Environment Bill will help to underpin some of the changes we need to fulfil its net zero target, as well as to achieve much more. As we move away from oversight of the EU, we need a new domestic framework for environmental governance. And as has been heard, this bill sets up a new Office for Environmental Protection to provide advice, but also monitor, scrutinise and enforce environmental law across the UK. We have an opportunity to lead the world on environmental matters, and I welcome the fact that this bill makes provision in a number of specific areas. I'd like to focus today on two of these areas, air quality and waste reduction. Firstly, air quality. And up to 36,000 deaths in the UK are linked to air pollution each year, which is known above all to contribute to cardiovascular and respiratory disease. Much attention is focused on fine particulate matter, that is, solid and liquid particles from various sources of 2.5 microns or less, which can penetrate deep into lung passageways and enter the bloodstream. It's important to recognise that although the very worst levels of air pollution are found in our major cities, air pollution affects all parts of the country. And recently I carried a British Heart Foundation particulate monitor around my constituency as part of a wider study being conducted by the University of Edinburgh. Daily exposure to fine particulate matter was relatively low at 11 to 43 micrograms of matter per cubic metre, but for brief periods in the vicinity of main roads, I recorded levels greater than 10 times the current EU limits we subscribe to and over 20 times the World Health Organization recommended levels. These figures are concerning, and I'm pleased the Environment Bill contains a commitment to a new legally binding target for levels of fine particulate matter. To go further, I would encourage ministers to consider whether a specific figure should be included in legislation at this point, based on WHO recommendations of an annual mean level of 10 micrograms per cubic metre, as I will.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in support of what my honourable friend is saying, I think the legal enforceability of these limits is a vital consideration for this House. Having been Deputy Leader of a local authority which took the last Labour government to judicial review to try and force it to comply with EU air quality limits, from which it sought and achieved a derogation, which means that my constituents continue to be subject to the emissions from Heathrow, which already far exceed those limits. That demonstrated for me the weakness of the enforcement. And I'd like to urge ministers, as the new Environmental Protection Office comes forward, to take very seriously the concerns which my honourable friend has outlined, to note that I would support them as well, and we want to ensure that our residents can rigorously ensure that those are enforced at a local level.
I think that's quite right, and I'd add that in addition to average annual exposure, I think daily maximum exposure limits are important too. And I turn now to waste reduction, and the mantra of reduce, reuse and recycle remains as relevant as ever. Now, many local authorities have effective recycling initiatives in place, and Denbighshire County Council in my constituency offers popular commingled and food waste collections. In Denbighshire, the capture rate of dry commingled recyclables is estimated at a very impressive 85 to 90%. Those go on to be separated at a modern and efficient site in Deeside. When looking to make new provisions, we should not lose sight of existing successes such as these, but equally we need to consider whether we can reduce the amount of waste we're producing, and whether while our drive to reduce single-use plastics is ongoing, what our approach is to energy recovery through incineration is. In particular, we should not generally be shipping plastic waste abroad, and certainly not without a clear idea as to how it will be managed appropriately. I'm pleased that the bill makes reference to the regulation of such shipments. A key element of this bill is producer responsibility. I welcome the UK-wide provisions in this bill which encourage businesses to pay the full net cost of managing their products at end of life. This can help drive up the use of sustainable and more easily reusable and recyclable packaging in products and improve labelling on recyclable content. In doing so, however, we should consider the approach to small businesses and the need to avoid a disproportionate impact on them. I also think it's important to be clear about the timescale for the introduction of such a charge, as larger companies will likely have the resources to develop more environmentally friendly products, whereas SMEs might not have the same flexibility. I endorse the proposal to facilitate a charge in England, Wales and Northern Ireland for single-use plastic items issued in connection with goods and services. For example, takeaways, following the clear success of the carrier bag charge. But we need to ensure there are reasonable alternatives widely available. Many are pleased to see the proposals relating to a deposit return scheme, again in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and I'm glad the programme has the support of the Food and Drink Federation. A deposit return scheme can help increase reuse and recycling and tackle litter, but great thought needs to go into its setup. For the sake of both consumers and producers, such a scheme needs to operate or at least be compatible on a UK-wide basis. We need to be certain that it makes environmental and practical sense to collect certain materials via a deposit return scheme as opposed to curbside recycling schemes, and bear in mind the ongoing economic viability of these local authority recycling schemes, which are partly funded by the collection of valuable materials such as aluminium. One point which the government may want to consider is the impact of such a scheme on small business owners and in particular shopkeepers. Many convenience stores will not have the space to store bottles or install reverse vending machines, and it's a real concern of the industry that as the deposit return scheme is introduced, customers will change their shopping habits towards larger stores, as they have done in Germany. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I congratulate the Government on bringing forward this bill, welcome the provisions within it, and I look forward to seeing it progress.